Now, for decades, Nigeria's presidential fleet has shuttled this country's leaders abroad and has at the same time acted as a sleek, elegant symbol of Nigeria's political power, or at least it's supposed to. But the fleet is now made up of aging, increasingly unserviceable planes. And recently, both President Tinubu and Vice President Shettima have had to face the terrifying prospect of their aircraft developing mid-air engine trouble, forcing them to abort their flights and to resort to commercial charter planes. According to This Day newspaper and aviation analysts who've done a comprehensive assessment, anything could have happened. They say that it is essential to have aircraft that can transport the president and his deputy safely to any part of the world. And beyond this, the presidential fleet remains a symbol of the permanence, durability, and survivability of Nigeria's political system, regardless of who's at the helm. But given Nigeria's current crescendo of political discontent, as well as a limping economy that's left a destructive trail of deepening poverty amid a catastrophic cost of living crisis, is this the right time to be talking about revamping the presidential fleet, even if the last time such a revamp happened was when President Obasanjo was in office half a century ago? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the strategist and CEO of the Global Trade Investment Company, Baba Yusuf. Sorry, I kind of missed the boat a little bit there. And of course, sitting next to him is the policy strategist and legislative consultant, Chibuzo Okereke. And in our off-site studio is the Dean of the Graduate Studies Department at Bayes University in Abuja, and of course, a Rise News analyst, Professor Adeniyi. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. Let me start with you, Baba Yusuf, because you are an aviation veteran. You've been in that sector for some time. Where do you stand on this issue of purchasing new aircraft for the presidential fleet?
Thank you for having me, Charles. I think I'll call it a political decision because to be honest, much as, and I'll say this, having considered all, respect with regards to the safety of the president of this country and the vice president, of course, other principal, officers that are given the mandate to run this country. But also, the heaviest respect and regard should be to the citizens of this country, whose mandate is to provide security and safety for the entire citizens of this country. That being said, let us contextualize the issues, Charles. The promoters of the procurement of the aircraft, which from all I can see is already a done deal, are justifying it based on, in your intro, what you said, some of the seeming malfunctioning of the aircraft. But then the aviation experts and people that understand how this works with regards to aircrafts will tell you to use the age of an aircraft to determine replacement is not an argument. For example, it is a known fact that Air Force One, the presidential aircraft of the President of the United States of America, is over 30 years old. The records will show that it was around during the time of President George W. Bush that there was a procurement of that particular Air Force One. Recall that President Obama also started the process of procurement of aircraft, but realized that the lead time it will take to manufacture the aircraft will take numbers of years that will lead to his time he has left office. I remember also President Donald Trump, then citizen, was challenging the procurement. Anyway, water under the bridge. Now the process is on to procure and manufacture an aircraft for Air Force One. Back to Nigeria. The aircraft we are talking about is an aircraft that was manufactured around 15, 16 years ago, precisely around 2019. And an aircraft...
You mean 2009?
2009, sorry.
Yeah.
An aircraft the age of an aircraft is not the issue, but the maintenance profile, the maintenance pedigree of that aircraft. The B, C, and E checks done, as at when due, for example. And except also there is need to retrofit the aircraft, for example, build up to the 9/11, threat, which introduced a new global threats, and presidents around the world looked at the need to retrofit the aircraft that they are using to fit, countermeasures of the emerging threats, but not to replace the entire aircraft. Another thing is, have we looked at the critical need to replace this aircraft vis-a-vis the issues that are leading to the malfunctioning of the aircraft in those two instances, for example? The argument around the unfortunate crash of the vice president of Malawi and also the crash of the chopper, of the former president of Iran, Saad Suri, let's also recognize that was a chopper. But in the two instances, the initial excerpts of what we can say without prejudice.
It was related to bad weather.
Bad weather. Yeah. So there's nothing like exactly. And those aircraft are smaller than a presidential jet. That being said, I think the op is not good for the optics, given the situation we are in this country.
Right.
Considering the fact that it will take us over $100 million to replace an aircraft, I think this government should be looking at managing expectations over and beyond managing optics.
Okay, well, thank you for setting that out for us. Let me come to you there, Prof, and thank you very much indeed for kindly obliging to go into the maroon studio, as we call it sometimes, although we can obviously see you on the screen, and more importantly, we can tap your considerable analytical skills. The current presidential jets have been in use for nearly 3 decades. I mean, would you put your family in a car that's that old on a cross-country trip?
Well, thank you, Charles, and of course, good evening, viewers. My understanding is slightly different from that of Baba Yusuf. My understanding is that an aircraft, should ordinarily last between ages 25, 30, and 35 years. And on the average, if it is possible, it's also good to replace an aircraft at age 22, That's about after 50,000 flight hours, after about 30 to 40,000 pressurization, irrespective of maintenance. And of course, we're in an age where technology is changing fast, where things are becoming new by the day. The pace of these changes, are increasing. Remember that it's an age of artificial intelligence. Things are happening at a frenetic pace. Against that background, you expect that when a technology is outdated, of course, you need some level of replacement. And the aircraft industry is a very delicate one, a very sensitive one, where remediation may be completely absent, So are we ready to say that the Nigeria's presidential jet meets that court? Yes, it meets it, because it was purchased around 2009 at the dawn of democracy. So it's 20-something years old, ordinarily, if we can afford it, But the next question will be that, is it the right time for us to acquire one? Then, of course, there's a counter question, which is, when can we say the right time is? We need to remember that we are a very poor, struggling country, and we do not have a national fleet. Countries that do not have presidential jet or presidential airplane, have national carriers, through which their presidents are ferried to places. And there's also the angle that we need to emphasize, that a presidential aircraft, for instance, is somewhat representative of the nation's brand, symbolizes, is an emblem that is symptomatic of nationality to some extent. If you talk about Air Force One, for instance, you remember prestige, you remember pride, and the American brand comes to mind. The American brand comes to mind. Yes, we may not put ourselves in their shoes, because we are in Nigeria, relatively poor, but of course, it's often good in some instances where things are salutary, to remember, how these things are best done in other places. But my problem really is the communication angle of it, the explanation angle of it from the presidential side. We have seen, we have seen the leak, but we haven't seen consequential response or explanation from the angle of the president on the need to acquire this aircraft. I remember in the period of Obasanjo, he was very clear about it, that he needs to have this thing done. We need a new aircraft. And of course, he was very forceful, typical of his character, very forceful, very convinced that we need to have it. And of course, eventually, he was obliged. But it's also okay to say that, yes, we have seen what has happened. Our president's aircraft, failing in Netherlands, couldn't go to South Africa with it, and of course, in Saudi Arabia as well. These are definitely not good, not experiences that is good, for the Nigerian nation. But what we need to do in this circumstance is first, the presidency needs to give more explanation, reasons to convince us more. And of course, if we cannot buy it outright, there are different arrangements that we can probably go into to cushion the pain,
right,
or to cushion the fact that it's a very expensive project.
Okay.
And of course, these are the measures we are going to take to ensure that the funds, the national coffers, is not monumentally depleted on account of purchasing a presidential jet at the expense of other pressing needs, most of which is the rising cost of living, of course, the economy being on the tailspin, and of course, the fact that our debt profile is rising, as the case could be.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. And Prof made some very, very important points there. I mean, I think one of them was when he talked about the fact that countries that don't have a national carrier tend to project themselves with presidential jets and so on. But of course, the counter-argument to that, Chibuzo Okereke, is the fact that for a lot of other people, you cut your coat according to your size, and you don't project something that you haven't got. I mean, Nigeria doesn't manufacture airplanes. We don't do anything like that. In fact, we hardly manufacture anything. So what would be the point of projecting yourself using some other person's product? Beyond that, of course, the consideration here harkens back to the issues facing Nigerians at the moment, which is namely that crushing cost of living crisis, but also the pressure of crumbling infrastructure, no light, bad roads, etc., and the government constantly telling the people that there isn't money to fix these things. And yet there are tens of millions of naira to spend on purchasing a new aircraft that, that will be fully equipped and spruced up, which of course adds more cost to the cost of the aircraft.
Absolutely, Charles. And I think that is the real argument. The real issue underpinning the argument we are having nationally is about that distrust, about that inequality, about that poverty, not really about whether the president should have a presidential jet or not. So when the citizens look at this kind of situation, and that is what is causing all this concern. In 2004, I remember when President Obasanjo pushed for another, to get, an airplane. There was a huge divide in the National Assembly because it was close to about 10 billion or thereabout. At the end, he was able to convince them otherwise and got one in 2005. And over the years, we have continued to experience this kind of issue. And as you mentioned, an aeroplane is not what you walk into a shop and offer some cash or check and pick it the next day. We're talking about a manufacturing or procurement process that is going to take almost half a decade, or more, depending on the arrangement. But the real issue is decision-making process. What are the alternatives, right? When you want to make a decision, you look at the alternatives, you look at where you are, what are the planes in the fleet, what kind of alternatives are available to us, what kind of arrangement are we going to, make. But you see, the president still needs to get approval from the National Assembly. And I think that people should not foreclose the fact that there's need for a robust debate about this in the National Assembly. So because they have the right to appropriate and they represent the people. So citizens have to reach out to their lawmakers and say, this is our position on this this issue or otherwise. But I think that we're also beginning to realize that democracy is not that cheap. Right? If you look at the supplementary budget on the recurrent for the fleet, just to fuel them, maintain them, they run in the billions. So we have to also look at value for money. Like Prof mentioned about projecting ourselves, our sovereignty, and you talk about the fact that these exchanges put pressure on our foreign exchange demand, because when we are looking for $100 million to get an aeroplane from another country, it puts pressure on our own local economy. So I think that we have to look at the alternatives, and then the National Assembly had to deeply and robustly debate the issue to know what is the right decision to make at this time.
Well, we're going to come back to that issue of the National Assembly, because that's one of the things we're going to talk with you, that you raised earlier about the robustness of those debates at the National Assembly. But Baba Yusuf, of course, the National Assembly that Chibuzo Okereke was talking about there rejected the last attempt to purchase a presidential yacht. So the fact that they seem to be the ones pushing for this purchase, or at least the Committee on National Security and Intelligence is pushing it, does that underscore its importance?
Thank you, Charles. I'm glad you brought this topic. I think that will help me respond to Prof's position. Nobody is saying that we should have a president that is roaming around without the emblem of office and the position of Nigeria as the giant of Africa and the largest, black nation in the world. But what we are saying is also to key into what you say. I totally align with you. We cannot live with these pretenses. Everybody knows we are heavily indebted. I don't know, Charles, if you saw the PwC Pricewaterhouse report for this quarter. It's abysmal. Now, we have to look at the options, like you said. And to correct that notion, with due respect to Prof, the average time you use an aircraft is not the length of years, but the hours. And Boeing's recommendation is about 70,000 hours, or about 35,000 return trips. And then the lead time for manufacturing, like Chibuzo mentioned, is very key. So if we step back and say, do we need a new aircraft probably for the office of the president, now not subjecting it to Mr. Tinubu, yes, we may need it. And probably that is an option to start a process with a lead time of 5 to 6 years, which means President Tinubu may enjoy it if he wins a second term or another president in the interest of national interest, okay? If that is the case, then fine, we can start the process, and maybe the procurement process and the budgeting can carry it if we now stagger the payment. But the other option is what we are hearing from reports, the procurement of an already used aircraft that was repossessed from an Arabian prince and businessman, by a German bank. And this aircraft already, if the justification is the age, as the proponents of age are talking, this aircraft is not new. It is sitting somewhere, and an American seller is trying to sell it on behalf of the German bank. So that could be an option, but the age is not the issue. Now, the key issue is this. If you want to procure an aircraft, and there are clear justifications, technical, from the technical point of view, from a risk point of view, from a safety point of view, then what is important for the presidency and the proponents is to open the books and let us know the content of that report vis-a-vis our dear president and his vice president, so that we can support that procurement. But then again, prioritizing these things are very critical, so that at the end of the day, we don't procure an already used aircraft, and 10 days later, we'll say that aircraft too has started malfunctioning.
That's a good point. We certainly don't want to do that, do we, Prof? And but is there, where you're sitting, I mean, you made some very interesting, I think, points that obviously elicited a lot of discussion here. Yeah. But is there a middle course, Prof, that the president himself could offer? I understand he has his own private jet. I mean, could he use it in the interim, pending the economic recovery he has promised Nigerians will happen during his term as president?
Yeah, why not, Charles? The president has been in the forefront of asking Nigerians to make sacrifices, And of course, we have also made it the point severally that most of the time, our leaders give us charges. They give us instructions around sacrifices. But of course, these pronouncements will be much more effective if we can see them exemplifying it. One way for the president to probably exemplify this is to say, fellow citizens, we cannot afford an aircraft for now. I'm going to use my own. I had one before. I can put it in good shape and use it. And of course, we will all be happy if you could do that. But we'll know there will be limitations as well, because there's also the question of national security consideration. Will it be right for a president to be flying a smaller jet? President of Nigeria, for instance, will be flying a smaller jet, considering his entourage and such other considerations. But of course, we're in their times, we're in unusual times. And of course, it's a time that we could go for broke, trying to get everything that we need to get. So it's possible, it's something that is doable, but it's a matter of choice anyway. And when he went to South Africa, we were told that there was no presidential jet for him to use. Some other arrangements were made. Well, he can continue to explore those arrangements, further to sacrifice. But let's not forget that at some point, it might also be a strain on our processes and procedures at the level of national identity. But the point I was making earlier is that if we cannot afford it now, considering the cost, which Baba Yusuf said is about $100 million, huge sum of money, when we have other priorities, other pressing needs, really. I'm aware, I've read it in places that there are other arrangements, that individuals or entities and nations can go into, through maybe leasing, for some time, and of course we'll do some servicing. Some other arrangements that can be softer than outright purchase, that's one route that we can resort to. Or what about thinking about a national carrier? I'm not sure this could take too long a time, for us to get this done if we think national carrier should come in place of a presidential jet at this point in time. And the third option, Charles, is probably, resort to the use of, we have some private airlines in this country that are doing very well. Air Peace readily comes to mind, and of course, the Bomb Air comes to mind as well. Air Peace, I'm aware, has some impressive jets, that the president can probably borrow now and again to do his journeys, So many options are available if we have to resort to a sacrifice. But again, we have to consider these in relation to the national security question, which experts, may interpret differently as the case could be.
Very reasonable suggestions you've made there, Prof. An alternative, of course, Chibuzo Okereke, which was suggested by This Day newspaper in its report, is about taking out a long-term lease. I mean, they talked about taking out a lease on a plane which will involve staggered payments that will be less taxing on Nigeria's treasury. I mean, is that a reasonable option?
Yeah, and that's what I thought about alternatives in decision making, value for money. These are important variables to be considered. An issue of aeroplane, you talk about whether you're going to procure a brand new one, you're going to have renewal. There's a level of renewal in terms of the parts, of the airplane that can give it life back. Then this issue of leasing also is very, very important. You're seeing businesses, private businesses go into a wet lease, dry lease, and some of these, even directly from the manufacturers. I understand there are some of them that have planes that you can lease. But like Prof mentioned, I think we don't have sufficient information. And Baba Yusuf also, corroborated that. What is the current status? Is this status bad that we cannot even, do anything? So that communication is also very, very important, so that you can build that trust. Because the real argument here, as I mentioned, is the issue of distrust, complete state exit between the government and the people. Citizens.
Well, in fairness, I don't mean to interrupt you, but in fairness, the committee in the Senate that was mandated, in the House of Representatives, were mandated in May to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the aircraft in the presidential fleet to determine their airworthiness and technical reliability. And the conclusion seems to be that for safety and national security, the planes need to be changed.
And the interesting thing, Charles, is that Section 62 of the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria that empowers the National Assembly to create the committees does not give the committees of National Assembly finality in decision. Whatever they have in their report are recommendations to the plenary. And when the report are laid, it's going to be considered at the committee of the whole and a resolution reached. And it will be interesting to see how the presidency will respond to a resolution from the National Assembly regarding this issue of presidential jet, especially when in the past we have heard the presidency say that resolutions of National Assembly are mere advisory. So we're going to see how the efficacy of this kind of advice, if eventually gets communicated to the presidency. So the committee, yes, they have done their job in line with the law, but these are recommendations that will go to the plenary, and at the committee of the whole, it will be debated and a resolution reached. I understand, yeah, people will say, oh, with the kind of statement that are coming out of NAS, oh, this is a done deal, right? But when it, is laid for debate and eventual finality of resolution, then we'll be able to see the thinking, around this. And like I said, nobody is basically against us having a presidential jet to take our president around or the vice, but the people are distrusted, they are disconnected, and the question is about value for money. If you spend $100 million, what is it going to give the country in return? Is it about symbolism, projection of national brand? How does people connect their everyday feeding, everyday survival to this national brand, pride, and camouflage of the presidential office?
Well, that's a good point. And you started this section, Baba Yusuf, so we'll give you the final word on this section of the discussion before we take a break and move on to other things. Coming off the back of Prof and Chibuzo there, do you think in the final analysis it's important for Nigeria to have a presidential jet? Because, I mean, even its colonial master, Britain, doesn't have one.
Yes, thank you. Just to put in perspective, the over $100 million I was even alluding to was with regards to the potential purchase of the second-hand aircraft.
Yeah, because the other one would be much more expensive.
Much more, almost over, maybe almost $500 million. Now, that being said, we have said it, and I don't want to sound like a broken record. Nobody is saying we shouldn't have a presidential jet. We've already have it. It's about replacement. So the conversation is about how do we replace the aircraft.
And when.
And when.
Yeah.
So the house, we have already given options. Procurement has a lead time of a brand new one. We can procure the one that we are hearing from the reports, which I have mentioned is not brand new. And the argument about 25 years, I still stand to be corrected. You can still have a 60-year-old aircraft that is what is called serviceable, and you can run with it. But that being said, we have the symbolism.
Yeah, but the maintenance costs will be higher.
It will be, but that is also subject to the hours that you use to fly the aircraft. And a 60-year-old aircraft that flew 30,000 hours is more serviceable than a 10-year-old aircraft that has done 70,000 hours. With that being said, it is the methodology of the procurement that will be very key now going forward.
Right.
If we agree we are going forward, with regards to the lease, I try to not to tend to agree with leasing an aircraft in the interest of national, security.
Right.
Because who are we going to lease from, and what kind of level of hold do we have on that aircraft to protect the principles? The methodology, the timing, and the how process is very critical going forward.
Okay. Baba Yusuf, thank you very much indeed. And Professor Abiodun and, of course, Adeniyi and Chibuzo Okereke do stay with us because we will continue the conversation when we return. You're watching Arise Primetime. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Primetime, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Well, I still have with me in the studio our panel of expert commentators, the policy strategist and group CEO of the global investment and trade company Baba Yusuf, the public policy analyst Chibuzo Okereke, who's also a legislative consultant, and in our off-site studio, the current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I'm going to shuffle things around a bit this time because we asked our analysts to come up with things they wanted to discuss today. I'm not sure that message got through to you, Prof, so I do apologize for that, but we did communicate that to Baba Yusuf and Chibuzo Okereke. But these are topics, given that you are an seasoned analyst, Prof, that you can get your head around very quickly and be able to also join us in that in the assessment of what those topics are. Now, so let me come to you, Baba Yusuf, because one of the other issues you wanted to draw attention to is this issue of the federal government reportedly running 4 budgets concurrently. And you were concerned that these 4 budgets are running all over and into each other. Tell us more.
Yes, Charles, thank you very much. I was a bit concerned when, we got the reports that after the discussions about submission of the supplementary budget for CAPEX. By the way, CAPEX means capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Recurrent can be called OPEX, operating expenses in private sector. And then we hear that weeks down the line, we are going to have another, proposal for the supplementary budget for 2024 budget, mid-year into the active budget of 2024. And that presupposes, if you look at capital expenditure, recurrent expenditure for 2023, recall that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu inherited a budget that was, being executed by the former president, President Muhammadu Buhari, and he sought for, passage of a supplementary budget. Now, we moved in, and Mr. President promised that we are going to have a January to December budget going forward, rather than the late, approval of budgets that goes into the new year, which was fantastic. But it appears that that was an over-promising situation, because it turns out now we are already having both recurrent and the capital expenditure budgets having to go through, supplementary approval because we are already going through deficits. Now, my concern and the concerns of other Nigerians, well-meaning Nigerians, is, how does that relate to fiscal discipline, Charles? I've said it time without number that unless we align our fiscal discipline with our there's an alignment of fiscal discipline with fiscal policy,
right,
and fiscal discipline, we will not be able to go forward. And one of the critical instruments of fiscal discipline is budget and its performance. Recall that budgets are actually plans based on projections, either most especially our crude oil output. If you look at the entire projections that were based on the 2024 budget, as it were now mid-year into 2024, we have not been able to meet up to 80% of the revenue expectations. And then here we are now struggling with that. But then again, we know that there is a traditional way you roll budgets up, especially capital expenditure. If by the end of the year you are not able to conclude those projects, you are supposed to roll them over.
Well, that's what they say they are doing.
Exactly. But then again, maybe,
briefly.
What I want to learn here is maybe the communication is not right. Because if that is the case, then they need to streamline what they are reporting to Nigerians so that we know where they are. But it's worrisome for me that the impression is we are running for concurrent budgets.
That's a good point, and that's a legitimate case that you're making. Let me come to you, Prof, in the off-site studio. I mean, according to the government, if there are elements of the 2023 budget that were not implemented, they can move forward. They can be moved forward to be implemented, because the presidency has denied claims that it will run 4 budgets concurrently this year. It said it was only related to the capital components of the 2023 budget and supplementary budget, which needs to be extended to December 2024 to achieve what they are supposed to achieve. And those capital expenses will drive economic growth and employment.
As well, but we are in interesting times where sometimes you hear something and you have to be careful. You only take it with a pinch of salt, because what will be manifesting in reality could be different. Otherwise, I heard one of the presidential spokesmen, Temitope Ajayi, providing a clarification that what government is rolling over, are actually capital expenditure, not necessarily recurrent. But maybe the question we should begin to ask ourselves again is, why is it possible, or why is it always impossible for us to complete the execution of budgets, within the circle that we have defined projects to be completed? Now we're talking about the Gregorian calendar, January to December, which actually began in the period of Senate President Ahmed Lawan, as far as I can remember, in the Buhari period, where they tried to bring about, the complete return to the January to December cycle. Perhaps we should be mindful of being much more disciplined, with compliance with these timeline. We know in some other countries they probably don't bother about January to December. In the US, for instance, the cycle is different. South Africa here, the cycle is also different. But in our own case, we had adopted the compliance with the Gregorian calendar. Why can't we be faithful to it? It highlights again the question of disciplines. We know budgets are like installments, towards it's an installment in the drive for national objectives. The level of faith that we invest in it will determine how well we are making progress in terms of growth and development. And that's why I think we should be concerned about making it an article of faith, enhanced implementation, and of course, be much more concerned about execution. These things are very, very important, realizing that the bane of our development efforts in the short, medium, and long-term basis has always been the lack of execution. And if we are seeing it rearing its head again, making budgets to spill from one to the other, then of course it's not a route that we should go at all. So that's my take, really, Charles.
Right. Prof, thank you very much indeed for that. And let me come to you, Chibuzo Okereke, because you are, of course, in addition to being a public policy analyst, you're a legislative consultant, so you know a lot more about what goes on in those corridors in the National Assembly. Just to be clear, these budgets are the capital component, that's what the government is saying, of the 2023 budget, the 2023 supplementary budget, the 2024 budget, and the 2024 supplementary budget. Do those raise concerns for you?
Well, first, there are a number of issues. Actually, in the 9th Assembly, the budget cycle law was made. That is January to December. And the president is meant to, no matter who is the president, submit the budget at least by September, and the National Assembly will have about 3 months to, work on it. And in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the medium-term expenditure framework, the assumptions that are in this budget could vary, over time. And yes, supplementary budgets come as a result of considerations of other emerging issues that the executive wishes to propose. And if the National Assembly okays it, it runs. Unfortunately, since we introduced the January to December budget cycle, we have now started having this issue of having to get the National Assembly to extend the expiration period, for the budget. Sometimes it could be because when the budget performance defense, were done by the agencies of government, the National Assembly observed that the capital implementation were abysmally low and decided, of course, to extend it. So yes, capital component of the budget is what is being, implemented. But the issue of rollover is a concern, because in the budget you have ongoing and new projects. So ongoing are projects that you couldn't, finish in the previous budget, then you carry it forward. But there is a huge implication with all these rollovers.
Right.
And the implication is the Section 85 of the Constitution that empowers the Auditor General to ensure that annual accounts of the countries audited are transmitted to the National Assembly. The Public Account Committees of the National Assembly has to consider those accounts. Now, if you keep rolling over a budget to beyond the year of appropriation, you're going to have backlogs. Right now, you see, they are yet to submit 2021 audited account of the Federation because of issues like this, and that imparts on public accountability.
That's
so
a very
I
good
agree
point.
that we should enhance our fiscal discipline and implementation strategies.
Absolutely. Let's move on from there, because the other topic you wanted to draw attention to, Baba Yusuf, is the issue of pressure groups, which you say are being formed in the north of Nigeria ahead of the 2027 election. What are your thoughts on that? Because we've heard from the likes of Senator Shehu Sani saying northern groups should abandon plans to try to unseat President Tinubu in 2027, as that could destroy the unity of Nigeria.
Thank you for bringing this matter up, first of all, because I'm a northerner, and what we have been speaking to in the last, especially, Fourth Republic, is that the unity of Nigeria. And one of the, reasons, justifications given by some of these northern elements, northern political leaders, if I may say so, build up to the 2023 election was to justify why power should shift to the south, rather than the north that have already enjoyed 8 years. At this critical moment when this country is highly polarized along ethnic, tribal, and religious lines, I was taken aback to see the subliminal positions taken by these political leaders, especially regionalizing the conversation. I don't have a problem with making it a national discourse with regards to the elites coming together to see how we can pressure any government in power, not necessarily an APC government, because the cyclical abysmal failure of the political class of this country is not about a political party, Charles, because as far as I'm concerned, all the political parties are, different bottles, the same wines in them. So it is for me to see the northern political leaders coming together to speak with a view to ensuring that we put government on its toes, whether it is APC at national or other parties as on national, not to regionalize the conversation at this point in time.
Okay, I don't mean to jump in there, but we're fast running out of time, so I want to just make sure that we get to everything before we go. Very briefly, Prof, your thoughts on what Baba Yusuf had to say just now.
Well, actually, most times indifferent to these occurrences, because it is also a character of democracy that at points in time you see groups, civil society organizations, civil groups, political groups coming up to make themselves heard. It is integral to democracy, and of course, when we talk about democracy, we're talking about innate to it is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and of association as well. So it's not that legitimate. It's a way to make themselves heard, and not to be taken for granted, and of course, for the government of the day to reckon with them, not just in the present circumstances, but of course, when elections approach or when elections come in the future. It's a way that people negotiate for power, maybe further to the politics of compensation, politics of reward for loyalty, and again, further overall, to the culture, to the neo-patrimonial culture that is presently over us, But like I said, overall, I'm indifferent to it. It's interesting, often a delight to watch them, and of course, amuse myself, because we're in a democracy, and democracy can actually be pleasurable if, conducted peacefully, as the case could be, Charles.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Prof. And Chibuzo, a final word from you, because you wanted to draw attention to what you said was the declining quality of legislative debates in the National Assembly and the perception that the Assembly is seen as a rubber stamp legislature and the citizens are simply unable to hold their lawmakers to account. You've got a minute to just draw attention. I'm sorry, we don't have that much more time.
Well, actually, you know, the National Assembly, or indeed the legislature all over the world, is a deliberative assembly. And what gives that flair, that, you know, joy is the kind of debates you see on policy proposals. So we're actually embarking on a project called the National Assembly Deliberative Scorecard, where we're able to track contributions of legislators in each of the policy proposal that is presented at the plenary. And we're also looking at the policy focus. How does a particular issue make its way to the National Assembly for consideration?
Right.
What are the things, you know, because we believe that we have to improve the quality of debate. We have to improve the skills of legislators to be able to take on issues as a way of, you know, improving their own perception by the public. Because that idea, the construct of rubber stamp, is to the fact that citizens want a robust debate on issues, so they can see the philosophy for agreeing or disagreeing with a particular proposal.
Well, I want to thank you all very much indeed. Sorry, we've run out of time, and obviously time gallops ahead. I want to thank you very much indeed, Chibuzo Okereke, the legislative consultant and public policy analyst, Baba Yusuf, who is the policy strategist and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, and last but certainly not least, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, who is a current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University in Abuja. Thank you ever so much. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me, the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.